is the Jake Feinberg Show, and we're happy to have all of you along with us today. Occasionally on the journey, I wonder why I pay homage to those players who I never met or saw play. To know authenticity when you never experienced it. I have interviewed Ira Gitler, Herb Wong, and Nat Hentoff on this journey. Guys who produced records, wrote liner notes, and filled in the human with the being. I interviewed Fred Taylor, who among other things ran the Jazz Workshop in Paul's Mall, which was a dual musical outlet for psychedelia and jazz. And now we get to North Beach, circa 72. A gentleman by the name of Todd Barkan takes over a club next to the police station called the Keystone Korner, 750 Vallejo Street. He creates a club that provided accessibility to great leaders for anyone who appreciated authenticity and love. He was a musical matchmaker who cared about the musicians' idiosyncrasies and how to fit personalities and make them work. He charged $3 during the week to see Cannonball Adderley, $3.25 on the weekends. The entire club permeated with the warm home cooking of Ora Harris. For those who wanted to roast a joint, there were ionizers on the ceiling that sucked the smoke right up so that it would not bother the people around them. Now, this establishment was already steeped in psychedelic blues like Michael Bloomfield and Nick Gravenitis, Jerry Garcia and Merle Saunders. And now Jake Feinberg's wheels turn again. Merle's cousin was Eddie Moore, who played in organ trios with Merle in the Fillmore district, where Calvin Keys would sometimes play the breakfast set. Calvin Keys said, "If you weren't playing the Keystone when you were in San Francisco, then you weren't playing." And Eddie Marshall came out because of the Fourth Way and started wearing his dashikis with James Leary and Herbie Lewis, guys who made up a rhythm section with vibist Bobby Hutcherson. Carl Burnett would come in and smell Ora's banana bread when he played with George Cables and Freddie Hubbard. Rahsaan Roland Kirk, a boyhood friend of Barkan's, and Grover Washington Jr. played benefit concerts in Oakland to raise money so the Keystone could obtain a liquor license. Understanding the true freedom of expression, a player in his own right and someone who validates what this radio host so desires. Todd Barkan, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Oh, it's my honor and blessing to be here.
Tell me something. What was so compelling about these artists that when you were younger, when you were working those construction jobs and you'd spend every dollar on those LPs, Hank Mobley, the Blue Notes, what was so compelling for you as a kid?
Well, one of the things it was just that the music it stimulated my core, the real essence of me, even as a young kid. It made my soul vibrate with feelings that weren't necessarily being generated or being stimulated by the ordinary environment of Columbus, Ohio, the supreme swing state.
Right. It's Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio is where I grew up, and Columbus, Ohio is right on the television now as being one of the centers of who will determine this upcoming election. And it was a very wonderful place for this music. But I got to the music through my parents' record collection. I heard the music all through my, even my infancy and grade school years. I was hearing the music, not necessarily knowing what it was so much. I first came to New York City, not for the music, but because my next-door neighbor in Columbus, Ohio, in Bexley, a suburb, was a guy named Herb Simons, and his son, Herbie Simons, was my classmate in kindergarten, and he died of Hodgkin's disease when I was in first grade. So the Simons kind of adopted me as their adopted son, and when I was 9 years old, they gave us 2 tickets for me and my father to come here to New York to go to the World Series to see the Yankees and the Dodgers in the first time the Dodgers ever won the World Championship in 1955. So I got to go to Ebbets Field and I got to go to Yankee Stadium. But more importantly, I walked out of the Pullman car with my dad at the age of 9, and I walked into Manhattan, and I felt like I had died and gone to heaven. The Asphalt Canyon blues that it made my heart sing. I just saw these big caverns of steel and concrete, and I said, wow, this is some other shit, at the age of 9, because it was so antithetical to what was in Columbus. And that music started to mean more to me even at home, because it became the music of this great metropolis, and the great home of where Superman lived, and other great Clark Kent and other
right.
great
But I mean,
icons.
yeah.
It became, New York became one of the lands of my imagination, and the music became the soundtrack of that imagination. And and then very shortly after that, I met Rahsaan Roland Kirk on a bus going to a Columbus Jets game. They were at that time, a Pittsburgh Pirates farm team. They later became a Yankee farm team and changed their name to the Columbus Clippers. But then they were the Columbus Jets, and I went to Jet Stadium on the bus, and I saw this guy with a horn, with a long stick with a horn on the top of it. That picture that you have of Rahsaan and Bolasete and me in Sausalito in 1973, Rahsaan is actually holding, those are not maracas I'm holding, that's actually Rahsaan's, that little, like a Clarabelle horn, whack, 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 like Clarabelle, one of those horns, with rubber horns, that was perched on the top of his famous stick that had hundreds of amulets on it, and bells and chimes and ringers, and a wheel on the end that he could roll down the street. So that stick went with him the rest of his life and was buried with him. So I saw that guy with that stick, with those amulets, with his nose flute around his neck, and he was on his way to see his girlfriend. By himself he was traveling, this sightless individual. And so I just, being a fearless young lad that I was, I just said, what are those things around your neck? And he explained to me that there were some instruments and a nose flute, and it turned out he lived about a couple blocks from me, because he was behind East High School, which was right adjacent to where Bexley was, just across Alum Creek, closer to the inner city. So I very soon got to hang out with Rahsaan, and he became one of my mentors, my leading mentor and guide to the music of the unforeheard, and great music that to me and of course he very soon explained to me that this was not only jazz music, which he always loved that word, but he also liked the word black classical music, and so I became aware of jazz as being a black classical music, So don't worry, that sound you heard is just my wife's phone going off.
That's a beautiful. It's like Rahsaan Roland Kirk. I mean, it's black classical music.
Right.
Here's the thing. Let's not overshadow the fact that there was. I want you to talk a little bit about, going to these supper clubs and your relationships with guys like Don Patterson, the Columbus scene. How did that influence you to be able to see the way these guys carried themselves, and the fact that there was like this up and down, like you were talking about Jimmy Smith, Wes, those guys would come up, they'd come right through there. There was that huge blues circuit, and I think that probably played a role with you as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's all part of the story, an important part of the story. I mean, in Columbus, Ohio, I didn't go when I was 10 years old, but I mean, a little later in my pubescent years, as I was getting a little older, I started to do construction work in the summertime, and I got to meet some of the construction workers. My Pee Wee Morrison, our shop steward for Hod Carriers and Laborers Union, and Big Hutch, and Rahsaan, and other friends I had in Columbus, jazz friends, Fritz Peerenboom, who was a great jazz disc jockey at that time. I got to meet these different people, went to visit them. Just as part of my increasing curiosity and participation, I was playing piano, learning to play jazz piano, and as a part of this central focus of my life, even after about the age of 8 or 9, I became more and more obsessed with this music as the greatest interest of my life besides my schoolwork. And it really was very, very inspirational to me. It just made me feel more alive than anything else. I remember when I was 13 years old buying Mingus and bringing it home and putting it on the record player and sitting there clapping along in 6/8. And also going to the clubs. There was the Club 502, but I had to get in those clubs. They were like clubs that you only got in, if somebody kind of snuck you in. I mean, you're supposed to be at least 18 years old, in many cases 21, to get in most of those clubs. So I went in, with wearing a lei around my neck, a Hawaiian flower, arrangement around my neck, which was for people that could only get 7-Up and water.
Right.
Or
peanut gallery.
By coming in. But I got to get in most of those clubs, and I got to go with Rahsaan and other people who took me in, who adopted me, and got me in live contact with this music, which is such a live, living art form. And you have to experience it live to really experience it. It's called being part of the shared cycle of creativity that makes jazz music what it is, and makes it the ever more vibrational experience of your entire being. And so I got to experience, I got to hear Rahsaan play. I got to meet Don Patterson, the great jazz organist, who was a huge influence on me, both as a musician and just the high level of swing that he would get with drummer Billy James. And he played with people like Sonny Stitt and Rahsaan and Booker Irvin, and made some of the greatest recordings. Around that time, I bought a great recording called Hip Cakewalk, which I think is one of the great jazz masterpieces of all time.
Prestige,
and, and I would play that over and over and over again. Sister Ruth and the great tunes on that record. Those were the soundtrack of my whole life. Bird in Flight with Donald Byrd and Duke Pearson and Reggie Workman and Lex Humphreys and Spike Mobley and Donald Byrd and Jackie McLean. I memorized every single solo on that record. I could sing it all from memory, even the piano part, the bass lines, the drum parts, the tenor solos, the trumpet solos, the alto solos. That became my University of Swing. So, and I was at that time 14 years old. So, I mean, that's what I've continued for the last, and now it is about 50 years later, and we're still trying to swing around here.
Absolutely. I'm
trying to do the most I can with and for this music that it's humanly possible to do.
Well, I feel like I found a kindred spirit with yourself. It's an honor to we're talking to Todd Barkan, the owner of the greatest psychedelic jazz club in the history of this country. And I have to ask you, excuse me. So this morning I took my 8-month-old daughter to Casa de los Niños, this thrift store, and there's a Discovery 2, probably an early 80s model organ, but you can play all these vibes on it. I got it for $40. Now, in 1967, you took a Fender Rhodes, probably trying to be like Lonnie Hewitt, and you're in a band called Kwame and the Quanditos. So
Kwame and the Quanditos.
So I'm assuming that you were you were playing alongside Cal Jader and Mongo and Willie Bobo, or you guys were the
No, they were in the environment. I wasn't playing with Mongo. I wish I was playing with Mongo. I wish I.
But no, I was partially kidding. But I'm saying you were a flower.
Part of Vince Guaraldi. It was part of the environment that I was making music in. A vital part and a very influential part. Cal Jader, I got to hear him live a lot, and Mongo, Santa Maria. That's where I got to meet Steve Barrios, with whom I worked in Fort Apache, with Jerry Gonzalez and Andy Gonzalez. It was a very, very influential, central part of my creative development. And I was part of this band called Kwame and the Quanditos. I mean, Tom Harrell played in that band, the legendary jazz trumpeter, John Handy, the legendary alto saxophonist, and many, many great musicians came through that band because we had lots of gigs. We had great gigs, and they paid pretty good money for that time. They pay as low as $50 a night, but $50 a night in the late 60s was good money. $100 a night, you were Fat City.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a different world. And $3 at the door that I eventually started at Keystone Korner, and $3.50, $3.25 on the weekends. You know, Sonny Rollins, we went up all the way to $4. Weather Report, we charged $4.
Yeah, no, but I think the cool thing that was happening as well is that no matter how big a player you were, whether it was Herbie or Miles, those guys would go to the clubs and watch other guys play. It wasn't in a bubble. It wasn't done virtually. It wasn't done on the computer. It was done intimately. Like Carl Burnett, who was all over the Portrait of a Jazz Club Keystone Korner book, which I highly recommend. The photos by Kathy Sloan, incredible. The whole thing's great. Burnett's talking about, not in this book, but he told me that when Herbie was in town, he would go see Al Zuleika play, who was with Jader. It was a Fender Rhodes guy. But the point is that these guys, it was this overlap. And you came in as a musician with the understanding of how music works. And you had this sense of saying, we need to create an environment. You said something earlier about people being able to see this music. I would add the caveat, they need to see it in an environment that spawns creativity on a consistent basis. And I think
you need to see it in an environment that's a true creative enhancer of the music. You can't allow any obstruction. So in the creative cycle, I call it the cycle of creativity, cycle of shared creativity. In other words, the artist plays the music, the audience experiences the music with the artist, and then the audience actually gives feedback to the jazz musicians, to the creative musician storytellers, and actually becomes part of the story that's being told. Then the musicians react to that energy that they're getting fed back, and that even further perpetuates and enhances and intensifies the whole experience, and prolongs it into a greater and greater high in the music being experienced. A high without necessarily any drugs or anything.
Right.
Being part of that trip. I mean, oftentimes people were definitely having a drink at the club, or smoking something at the club, or whatever they were doing to enhance their experience. But the most important thing is the music itself and the interrelationship between the audience and the musical stories that are being shared, and then we all go on that trip together. As I say, the trip to the unforeheard.
Well, we got a ton of music in store, and I want to play this track right now. It is something I found online, Todd, and we can come back and talk about it. Okay?
All right.
So we could go on and on there, but you want to take a crack at who that is?
Well, I mean, some of that sounded a little like Pharaoh Saunders.
Nice, you are on fire, man. Nice job. You know, is that Cecil McBee, Lonnie Liston Smith, and Pharaoh, and then a drummer that I can't remember the name, and it was like a
Sunship?
No. Believe me, if it was Woodrow Theus, Jake Feimer would be all over that. But no, this was a different cat and a conga player too. But that was like a 27-minute track.
That was probably Babatunde on the congas.
No, it was
Lawrence Killian.
What I like about it is because as a non-musician, I would have been there sitting on an uncomfortable bench, probably, inebriated to a degree, but totally, meditative. How many people came there to meditate? Really? Just...
Quite a few, yeah. Even Carlos Santana came to meditate.
to talk about that.
Yeah, but he was, a lot of people came there just to go to the land of the unforheard, in peace and relative tranquility, and go wherever the music took them. That was a wonderful thing about that club, because there was such a diverse expressionism of such an unexpected universe was constantly being created, that people, the people that came there, by and large, were totally open to wherever the music might take them. And one of the weeks that illustrated that most passionately and effectively was a week that I hired, just out of some freak of bureaucratic solipsism, I wound up booking Earl Father Hines Trio opposite Don Cherry and Colin Walcott. And
can you explain to the audience why that's such an interesting pairing?
Well, Colin Walcott and Don Cherry are pretty outside, adventuresome, avant-garde Eulipians, people who are really adventuresome musicians beyond category, who combined 16 different cultural streams into one far-out total creative expression. Colin Walcott playing a multitude of instruments, including some percussion and a variety of other things. And then Don Cherry, who played all kinds, everything from Chennai to cornet and everything in between, and gongs and bells and whistles and sirens. And then Earl Father Hines, who was one of the great innovators, part of the essential history of jazz piano since before Nat King Cole. He was like Fats Waller and Duke Ellington and Count Basie. He was one of the grandfathers of jazz, founding fathers. And he had a big band which was a preliminary to Billy Eckstine's first great bebop band. Anyway, Earl Hines lived in semi-retirement in Oakland, but he was traveling quite a bit. And he came in with an adventuresome little trio, and so it was, and I was worried that Earl wouldn't, would be a little kind of turn up his nose a little bit about the far out cats, and lo and behold, he was farther out than anybody else. And he embraced Don Cherry and Colin Walcott like they were long lost soul brethren and artists, like they were artists in his own band. And indeed they were. They were all part of the great big universe of Eulipia and creative music and the continuum of jazz expression for the last 100 and more years. But now there are such enormous categories being trying to be imposed upon the music, or rigid categorization of different musical expressions, that that would be even more unlikely now. But it was a wonderful case of what's the phenomenon when you find things by accident?
Serendipitous.
Yeah, it was a serendipity sonata.
And you happen to be you would have you had the wherewithal to be able to make a move on it. And
we had Stan Getz opposite Johnny Guitar Watson.
And see, that to me is brilliant. And I was going, and listen, and to be fair, there were other tremendous promoters in that mecca. I wanted, it's really interesting. I wanted to ask you about in the early 70s, right around the time that you took over the Keystone. New York was mired in economic strife. There was crime, and a lot of those cats came to San Francisco. Eddie Marshall was one of them to come to the Fourth Way. And I was hoping you could talk about how the jazz scene in San Francisco got real solidified with those East Coast cats that came out there at the time that you got your hands on the corner.
Well, I mean, that was a part of the story, a very important part of the story, because in the 70s, New York was kind of going through some rough times with cabaret laws and crime in the streets and other spiritual malaises and cultural malaises that it was going through in the aftermath of the psychedelic years. And so by 1972, New York was kind of, its jazz scene was stuttering a little bit. And along comes this psychedelic jazz club in San Francisco. There were clubs closing in San Francisco called the Both And, were kind of waning. So there was a need for Keystone Korner, and that's always an important part of the story too. The time and the place and what you're doing, all the symbiosis of all those factors. So we came along at a point where the Both And was just on its last legs, and the Jazz Workshop had just closed, and here comes this psychedelic little jazz club next door to the police station. And New York was, a lot of cats from New York were looking for someplace to play outside New York in the States, beside going to Europe or Japan, which has always played a vital role in the survival of almost all jazz musicians. So I would get situations happening where Rahsaan Roland Kirk or Max Roach or Dexter Gordon or Art Blakey or Elvin Jones would be more than happy to come in and play the little old Keystone for 2 weeks. And, and Tony Williams, I was the only place Tony Williams worked in the whole country for years in the 70s. And with his, very at the kind of the later editions of the Lifetime, and then Tony Williams with vocalists and all kinds of wild things that he was doing with his more fusion-y bands, and then even into his later straight ahead period. Tony was a very important Keystone character, and it was very tragic that he died as early as he did. He died out in North California, so at a very young age. So it was very, Tony Williams, Max Roach. One of the greatest pictures I have on my wall right now is a picture of Tony Williams and Max Roach hanging out by the stage at Keystone Korner. And that's the only known picture I know of the two of them hanging out. And it was because Max came to town early to relax, and before he opened up his 2 weeks, while Tony was just closing down his 2-week engagement on a Sunday afternoon. So they're hanging out with Max Roach in his horrible-looking check coat he had on, and a white hat, looks like he was ready to go to the racetrack. And here's Tony Williams, and there you can see the love between them. And that was a very important part of what the Keystone was all about, that kind of fraternal and brotherly, sisterly kind of, just the kind of warm human environment that whole place represented, and as how it functioned on a day-to-day basis. Because we didn't, the kind of club that was when Dexter would have wall-to-wall business and lying around the block on a Saturday night, he'd come back into my office and say, "Oh, Todd, we paid the phone bill tonight." Because that was it was a labor of love, totally. From the people that worked the door, people that answered the phone, the janitor, the manager, the assistant manager, everybody was a musician, everybody was into the music, and we felt it was a major victory if we paid the rent.
And
there was a time when in the middle '70s when Yusef Lateef had just lost his tenure at the Manor School of Music, and he was kind of disappointed and disillusioned with the whole music industry. And he came to Keystone Korner one summer. He always played there in the summer and did great business. Kenny Barron and Tootie Heath and Bob Cunningham. But he came with this one band. He had started playing funk, an ill-advised move from my point of view. But he was playing funk, and it was not getting the most popular response in the world at that time. And first night it was packed. The second night it was half a house. Third night there was about 30 or 40 people in the house. So Friday night he comes into my office and he says, Brother Barkan, he said, will there be any problem paying the band this week? And I said, well, not if I go and sell my car. So I actually did sell my car.
Right.
To pay the band for that week and the next week. They were only getting $3,000 a week, which is only $500 a night for a 6-night week. But if I hadn't sold my car and a bunch of other personal possessions and some LPs and some other stuff, I wouldn't have been able to pay the band because they were a bomb. It just wasn't drawing. I mean, people wanted the jazzy Yusef Lateef. Nothing wrong with the funky Yusef Lateef, but it wasn't what that audience was. It wasn't what that audience was. It wasn't what that audience was all about.
Yeah, well, that phone call is a cue to the next piece of music. You may not be down with the funk, but here's a beautiful example of a guy.
I'm down with the funk.
No, and I know
I'm into the Parliament Funkadelic and Roy Ayers.
But I want to get to you. I want to get you to Mother Earth, Latin, late '60s. You try to pick this flute player out live at the Keystone. This is also, by the way, Tucson resident Jamie Waddell mastered this. This was a Bob Menke recording. Let's hit it. All right, can you take a gander on your flute player?
Wow, that's pretty deep there. I mean, that's not a recording I've experienced in my life on the Jazz Highway, but
because that was.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Wait a minute. But I'm just going to take a guess. I mean, I can't imagine like it was Roger Glenn. I'm trying to think, what flute player could that be? Mel Martin?
No, but not. But again, this is we're talking about an ethnic, Mexican cat who wound up in El Paso with Howard Wales. the organ player,
Mexican cat.
Mexican, yeah, and came in there and was the, shades of joy, flower power, guy, bad horn player and flautist, Martin Fierro.
Oh, Martin Fierro.
Yes, and that was part of.
That's a blast from the past.
That's part of Jake Feinberg's job.
I haven't heard that name in 40 years.
Well, that's why we do this, and that's called Name That Tune with Jake Feinberg, and I've done it with. I've hoodwinked a lot of, but that was, again, that was a. That
was a rough one, bro. But I love it because it's great to remember Martin Fierro.
Well, here's the thing.
I literally have not heard that name since the 70s. I mean, Martin Fierro. I'm like, oh, wow.
Well, and
we used to call him Martin Fierro, but Martin Fierro is fine. Better pronunciation. Yeah.
Well, what I wanted to say is this is a class. Again, this was mastered by a Tucson resident, Jamie Waddell. It was transferred, taped by Bob Menke, front of board, meaning front of soundboard, meaning. So were there cats in there that would come in and tape jazzers, like audience recording stuff? Would you permit the jazz stuff? Obviously, there were the Jerry fanatics, but what about I would think I
didn't discourage it. I never said anything. I mean, it was not the era. I mean, God bless it if it had been, because we'd have a lot more bright moments to enjoy and celebrate. But if I didn't discourage it. It's like what the Dead used to say when they, started a gig. They'd say, "Hey, listen, everybody now turn on your tape recorders. Come on, we're going to go get with it." And, Jerry Garcia would, he'd be turning on a little tape recorder on the stage even. But I didn't discourage it, but not a lot of people were doing that. But if they were, I certainly didn't say anything. I didn't care. I mean, the music is to be shared in any way, in any and every way possible.
In many ways, you and Garcia,
and that's what it's all about. We're sharing our musical stories with each other, and trying to get to the land of the unforheard. The
unforheard. In many ways, you and Garcia overlapped in philosophies, in the sense that he was quoted as saying, once I play the notes from my guitar and they leave my guitar, they're of no value to me. Let everybody else enjoy them and marinate in them. And I think that for you, I just think that night, and there were a bevy of them, where you could just sit there and smile because you saw the audience locked in, the musicians were relaxed, which was so important to make sure that they were relaxed, and maybe watching them get into a groove, on the fourth night of a 6-night run, and they're just cooking. To me, it was, you have to create that environment, and you did that quite well. So it was a selfless kind of thing. I mean, like you said, you were selling your car and hip cake walk to pay the band,
Absolutely. And I would do it all over again. I mean, it was part of the gig. I mean, I don't have any regrets on that level, or in any other. I mean, the thing is that's part of what, that's part of what, I don't know, there's a song called "The Price You Pay the Price You Got to Pay to Be Free."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's very important to have that kind of creative latitude, and it's a great honor and a privilege, to have that. And so I always felt very blessed. The 11 years that I had the Keystone, including, the first gigs that I put on there were actually inherited. They were gigs that were left over from the previous owner, Freddie Herrera, as part of his selling me the club for $12,500. He said, "I'll give you a couple free nights because you're going to be broke the night you open this joint." And so he allowed Merle Saunders and Jerry Garcia owed him a favor, a big favor. So they were already paid in advance. He had already given them cash to play there for 2 nights. So he just gave me those 2 nights as my first 2 nights. So here I have Merle and Tom Fogarty and Merle Saunders and Jerry Garcia. And Jerry Garcia comes into my little fledgling office where I'm still putting up little pictures of Dizzy Gillespie and Freddie Hubbard on the wall, and some psychedelic psychedelic blankets and all kinds of stuff on the, just to kind of create a vibe. And he comes in, and he has one of his guys with him. He's got a little tiny PV pig nose amp turned up to 10, and he starts tuning up. And there's a guy there, his assistant, but his guy wasn't helping him with the guitar. The guy had set up right there on a little table next to us, and he had a little glass filled with hash oil, and he was rolling joints and dipping them in the hash oil. And then Jerry was smoking 2 or 3 of these cigarettes at a time, and that was the first gig at Keystone Korner that I experienced. So the next week, I hired Bobby Hutcherson and his quintet with George Cables, Eddie Marshall, James Leary, and Hadley Callman. That was the next gig.
Killer.
Jerry and Merle. But I love Jerry and Merle, and Jerry and Merle played regularly at the Keystone in Berkeley after that, and we would definitely remain friends. And he would come by the club, as would the wonderful Merle Saunders. They were very wonderful guys. And at that point, there wasn't the real isolation. There wasn't as much isolation as there is now between, jazz musicians and pop musicians. There was a much more of a cross-fertilization going on, even on a personal level. And we had all kinds of rock people coming in, and people of social, the social movements, the great comedians of the day, like Robin Williams and Richard Pryor and Red Fox and Angela Davis would come in, and H. Rap Brown and other social luminaries would come by. At least, we didn't get too many of the people with the, with security guards. We weren't big on that. I mean, we didn't get a lot of, although they would have been very safe next to the police station. But we didn't have too many presidents and people who had, and it was long before the era of terrorism that we have now. But there were many people of all walks of life where they came in and as Tom Jones says, to do and to be undone. And it was a wonderful hang. And when you went to the men's room, you looked out the window over the urinal, and you saw police cars, and sometimes people even being dragged in off the street with handcuffs and being escorted into the nearest cell, or just policemen getting off work, or coming across the street and asking me for a bowl of sugar. So I mean, it was a very, very wonderful, and remarkably relaxed environment. We had one thing that happened early on in the club's environment, which I'm going to talk about in the book that I'm writing, Memoirs of the Club. It's kind of a sequel to the Keystone picture book and oral history. But Armando Perazza, the fantastic percussionist, who is such a wonderful part of Carlos Santana's early musical voyages and external. He came to me one night early in the club's development and growth, and he said, "Oh, Todd, you're going to be busted in the next few nights. We want this club to survive. You better make sure there's not a marijuana cigarette or anything, just make sure there's nothing, and you got to be clean, and just if somebody, even if they're being casual, just be careful, and be extra careful, because somebody is got it in for you, and they're going to try to bust you." And lo and behold, 2 nights later, the tax squad busted in, and the DEA, and they came in about 12 o'clock at night. They came in the front and the back door, and they went around, and they looked around. They opened my safe. And meanwhile, pursuant to the admonition of Mr. Armando Perazza, I had I cleaned up whatever little pot seeds were on the floor. We vacuumed everything. There was nothing there. It was never a purveyor of narcotics anyway. That was not what was happening in that club. And they looked around. They found nothing. And after that, we just became good neighbors, good friends, good neighbors. There was a tremendous level of trust. I was very cool about it. I didn't get paranoid about it, and they didn't either. And it was very, very, we had people that cared about us in the environment. Bill Graham was a supporter of Jazz Lincoln Center, and Michael Stepanian, a famous lawyer, did all our legal work for free for 11 years. It was just a lot of love and a lot of care and a lot of protectiveness, and it was a little home away from home for all these musicians.
How do you feel that? What is that intangible that was present there? Again, it wasn't something that was in every city in the country. Dave Liebman talked about that in the Keystone Korner book. This probably couldn't have been done in Denver or Southern California. It was the serendipitous right place, right time. But what are the qualities that are missing today in your mind as it relates to? I think it's obvious.
Well, the challenges I think it's the challenges. I think that's how you got to look at it. Because I'm not defeatist about it, and I'm not despondent about it in terms of it happening again with that kind of warmth and that kind of depth and that kind of expansiveness, I think is the best word. And that kind of creative expansiveness and creative and humanistic expansiveness. And warmth and depth and softness and humanness. I think that it could happen again, but it takes the right kind of people and the right kind of time and the right kind of place for it to happen. It's more difficult than it was for me 40 years ago. We opened in 1972, so it's exactly 40 years ago. It's more difficult than it was at that time for a variety of reasons. But money being salient among them, because everything is so much more expensive and so much more difficult socially as well as financially, that it creates more obstacles to that happening. When Sonny Rollins first played my club in 1972, I charged, as I said earlier, all of $4 at the door. And it was a special show, so we jacked up the price 50 cents. And so we made it $4 all week, And so the first show he played, the set was exactly 28 minutes long, 29 minutes, the first set. And I went up to Sonny and I said, Sonny, that was kind of a short set. And Nuke looked at me with his long flowing blue robes and said, we'll have to call them episodes. So, being a jazz hippie and not being, daunted by such a, instead of getting upset and being uptight about the whole situation, I just put a sign up in the front window, and it's more money than we'd ever charged, $4. I just said, continuous music from 9:30 till 2. And he actually did 5 episodes that evening. So, and he had a great band with Jack DeJohnette and Bob
Cranshaw,
and Masuo, this great guitar player from Japan. And it was wonderful music, and it was a great experience. But the thing was that, you had to have that kind of flexibility. We only cleared the house. We only cleared the house if we absolutely had to. Obviously, I couldn't pay Miles Davis his kind of money without doing that. I couldn't, I had to clear the house. But I would even apologize for it.
I just think that
just because that wasn't where we were coming from. It's just that was, so you have to have you have to have rather idealistic ownership and naive, and it may be that again. You have to have that. Just like great art is a very delicate balance between the artistic and the autistic. Likewise, being a really great jazz club owner and running that kind of creative environment, generally speaking, there's so much corporate bullshit going on that it's almost impossible to do that kind of thing.
Right.
So you gotta, hopefully, there's either corporate bullshit or the owner is so paranoid about making his nut, and so scared he's either going to go out of business or not be able to pay the band or just afford to continue what he's doing. Those are all contributory factors to making an environment too uptight. And that's not the kind of environment that you need to really present this music most effectively and most expansively and create the kind of house of love and house of harmony and house of swing that you have to have a great jazz club. And you have to fight for it. You've got to be passionate about it. And there's a lot of people that talk the talk, but then they don't want to walk the walk. And that's why there aren't any jazz clubs in the world today. Of any, there are a few, but to create that kind of environment, Ronnie Scott's is not as warm as it used to be in London, and that's because the people that took it over are really a lot more corporate than Ronnie Scott and Pete King used to be, and likewise in whether it's in Los Angeles or in San Francisco or wherever, it's more of a challenge to find those really warm, caring, loving. They sound like cliches, but they're really not. It's a matter of fact. It's just like Andrew Cuomo just said on television, and God bless his soul. He said, it's not a political discussion. The global environment's fucked up.
Right. No, and
so this is not a question of fact. And pardon my German. The world environment is rather all messed up. And likewise, it is about love, and it is about caring, and it is about all those cliches, so-called cliches and corny maxims, but that great music takes a lot of great love, or it isn't really great music.
The other thing I have to say is, you happen to have a stable of black musicians who were, they were raised, they had an intellectual capacity that was pretty great. They were extremely spiritual, like you said, the meditation and the sonship theists and the, and this to me strikes at, not to be oversimplified, but, the sort of the lack of sophistication within black art today, specifically music. Where are the younger African-American musicians that pervaded the Keystone Korner? Like, the list is too long, but Bobby Hutcherson, Eddie Marshall, James Leary, all the guys, Oscar Brashear, George Cables. I mean, where are those?
No, there are many. They're still around.
Good.
They're still around,
Good.
And there are many great young musicians. They're all over the place. They're all over, from Vancouver to Savannah, and from New York to El Paso and to San Diego. They are all over the place. Young black musicians, young Asian musicians, young Caucasian musicians.
They just don't have a place to play.
Well-educated. Well, wait a minute. Well-educated, bad mofos, and people who can play, who really care about this music, and all of that. But the question is, where do they have a place to play? Not that they don't exist, because they are out here, and they are playing, and there are some great musicians. I could spend a couple hours talking to you about just the great players that are out here. But I mean, it's a question of being able to provide places for them to play. I mean, I worked in the last few weeks extensively with a Cuban-American pianist, Elio Villafranca, who's creating some of the greatest Latin jazz created ever in the history of the planet. And he had a band with Louis Nash and Carlos Enriquez and Greg Tardy and Vincent Herring and Terrell Stafford and one of the great unsung heroes of the conga and percussion, Anthony Carrillo and Jonathan Troncoso and two dancers. And I mean, they created as great a music as I ever worked with Chico O'Farrell or Jerry Gonzalez and the Fort Apache Band, as great or greater. and that was just a few weeks ago. So, I mean, these people are out here and with commitment. It's a question of creating a musical and social and physical home for them, and homes for them to perform. Out there where you are in Arizona, IA, there's a new facility just opened up in Phoenix called the Nash, and it's a fantastic. I was there for the grand opening. I went out and emceed for the opening, and there was some great music. And Louis Nash recently had his first real, big concerts. We did the big ceremony and fundraiser at the MIM, the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix.
Sure.
But the Nash, named after the great grand master of jazz drums, Louis Nash. Louis Nash is the same, to me. He may not historically be accorded the same respect by the press and by legendary commendations, but Louis Nash is, on the same level for me as Billy Higgins used to be, one of the house drummers of the Keystone. So, I mean, Louis Nash is around. And then there are, the children of Nash and Billy Higgins, who various generations, Greg Hutchinson, Jonathan Blake, and so many other great young drummers who are swinging and who care about the music, who love about the music, who are willing to lay down their lives for this music. So it's just a question of we need more environments.
Yeah,
we need more loving homes.
Okay, but why is it, when you say corporate, does that mean callous? Does it mean totally superficial? Does it mean innate of anything individualistic because then it's outside the corporate model? I mean, that's the problem. The problem is that everything is sterilized by this sort of this word corporate, but nobody really knows what that means.
People know what it means, and it's not necessarily it's not a great thing. Unfortunately, I mean, even worse word than corporate is PC, politically correct.
Right.
I mean, what's causing the United States to be, paralyzed by an insane dichotomy between the people who really care about the human race and those who don't, and people, just desperately clinging to an outmoded social paradigm that's about to change in the new socioeconomic paradigm that's about to engulf the United States, and the people that are clutching to the huge ripoff that they've managed to pull off in the last 50 years. I mean, that's part of the whole thing that's going on. I mean, it isn't necessarily a question of it's something we have to approach on the most positive and creative level we can, because identifying it pejoratively and saying, well, it's just it's not a good thing. I mean, that kind of corporate mentality where only the bottom line matters, that doesn't necessarily, in fact, that doesn't foster great art 99% of the time, and or maybe 99.9% of the time. So, I mean, there has to be more, genuine love in this society, and more caring in this society, and more humanism in this society, and more and greater value being greater values, better social values and human values being imparted to the upcoming generations about what's really important and what's really valuable to us as human beings. And that is not what corporate culture imbues human beings with. And all this enormous, all these monsoons and tidal waves of technology that are consuming everybody and making everybody an ADDS idiot. I mean, that's just, we're being sensorially bombarded by all this crap that we don't, we've got such a world of such tidal waves of turds that we can't even smell a flower. You know, so I mean, that's the biggest problem, and jazz just happens to be caught in those tidal waves. And if we're better for worse, so what we have to figure out is, those things that we have to try to make, those of us who really believe in the music and really have dedicated our lives to its promulgation and advancement and essence. We got to try to do what we feel is best, in terms of getting this music out here. And sharing it with people. I mean, we can't do it in too preachy a format. I mean, even when I used to teach jazz in some schools, a lot more than, interestingly enough, I haven't been doing it as much since I got with Jazz Lincoln Center, which is an educational institution, as I used to do before. I used to teach a lot more classes in jazz, and I mean, I do some of it now, but I used to do a ton of it, especially when I was on the West Coast. And I would go into a grade school or junior high or high school, and I wouldn't even say, I would tell the administrators, hey, don't say it's a jazz class. We're just going to talk about music. And I would start to play music. I would hand out pieces of paper. I'd say, man, tell me what kind of imagery does this music suggest to you? What does this music teach you? How does it make you feel? Brotherettes and sisterettes, how does it make you feel? And I would play like for 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds, I would play like McCoy Tyner playing a solo version of Naima. And all of a sudden, these kids would be drawing pictures of waterfalls and the sun coming up over their house.
Right.
because I didn't say this is jazz,
right,
man, and I didn't try to invoke those stereotypes and that shibboleth that this music is somehow hard to grasp or difficult or advanced or for intellectuals only. I mean, that was one of the worst things in many ways that happened to the music. It was a natural thing that had happened because there was such great music being made by Charlie Parker and the Cats that, after swing, and then we got, in the late 40s and 50s as bebop and the music that we all love so much even got to be, it's very joyous and life-affirming music. It's as life-affirming and joyous and danceable as any rock beat or group that ever lived. But, it was a dance sometimes of all the lobes of the brain. It was a multi-lobe dance.
Right, and that somehow that doesn't fit.
The thing was that it got unfortunately, jazz actually got racially segregated and socially segregated as part of the enduring racism of our own culture.
Right. No, and this is
the Southern strategy formulated itself in America, and which is reaching its creative apotheosis and still going strong with George Romney and the Bushes and the Beaches and the Bosches. With all this, and Pat Buchanan is still alive. With all this stuff going on, they marginalized jazz. They marginalized somehow, and so you don't. It's not even that. It has to fight to be heard on television or radio or wherever. But it's still worth the fight, and it's worth every single bit of effort on its behalf, because it's such great music, and it's music of the heart, music of the soul, music of the mind, and music it's great American classical music, and it's great black classical music. It's a great expression of the heart and soul of humanity. It's a universal language, and one that will endure until the last cockroach is dead. So I mean, it's a great timeless miracle of life, and we're still celebrating it. So, but I mean, the corporate culture is not that it's a kind of a necessary evil. Corporate culture can help support jazz, but it must not control jazz. So there's a real challenging dichotomy there.
Yeah,
because you don't want to overly try to control it and try to narrow it artistically or aesthetically or humanly, narrow it. You don't want to make it just a Brooks Brothers expression, but you got to have room for Charles Lloyd at the Keystone Korner taking his pants off and playing a flute solo with just his underwear on. You have to have that. You have to have room for that. It's very important, and it's very important for the music to have the full human spectrum represent the full human spectrum of human experience, of creative possibility, of all that stuff. I mean, it's what the music is all about.
Todd Barkan referenced. I got to get in here. I got to get in here for a second, okay? You just referenced George Romney, right, which shows that Barkan goes back a ways. But I wanted to, I think what we're looking at here is
more myth, actually.
But you referenced George, which was classic. But the thing is that I think really quick, okay? Two questions. Are we witnessing another? You talk about politically correct, shrill, unable to move forward. Yes or no? Are we witnessing one of the last real evangelical Christian crusades? Number one. Two, quickly, a prediction for Tuesday. I say Obama in a landslide. What say you?
Well, I say Obama by a good, healthy margin. I don't know if it's going to be a landslide. But I think he's going to win by a good, healthy margin.
The Crusades, But
I wouldn't agree with you that this is the last. This is the last evangelical crusade, because the folks that are involved in that type of effort and who are hell bent on the afterlife are not. I don't think they're going to give up if Romney loses.
Of course not.
But I think they'll be even more passionately dedicated to winning in 2016. So I don't think this is the end, and there's been a couple of very prescient essays written about why the right will always inevitably win. I mean, there are a lot of cases to be made for that, because they are, the folks that represent that type of persuasion are so passionately well organized, in general. And I mean, Auden wrote about that, decades ago, about the center not holding and the forces of evil being so well organized. I mean, that's and I'm not demonizing the right or the left or the center. I just think, as Andrew Cuomo just said in the aftermath of these storms, which are going to be the first of many storms to bombard both our coasts and with all kinds of stuff going on. But as he said, it's not a question of right or wrong, or a political red or blue, red and blue. It's not a political discussion. It's just an understanding that the water is coming over the ledge, and it's not a question of discussing why. It's a discussing of what are we going to do,
right,
to deal with this,
right,
because it's a reality, and we better stop trying to deny the facts. And in this case, that's what I feel, that there's still a lot of denial. That the entire human race is, we're all part of this process. So I think the denial's we gotta cut out the denial before we get denied, and that's why I unfortunately I don't think that this is the last evangelical crusade that we're going to be
dealing with.
We're going to have to submit ourselves to, or we will be submitted to, or subjected to is the right word. But but at the same time, I think the United States is in a process of evolution and quiet revolution, and I think, and it's going to become much more of a multicultural reality here, no matter who's willing to accept it or understand it or really deal with it. That is a fact, and I think that's making the forces of anti-humanism kind of a little more impassioned too. I think they can see the handwriting on the wall, you know.
Todd Barkan, we could talk for hours, and we will do a part 2, maybe a part 3, and Lord knows what else. Bagels and Bongos, Irving Field's Trio, Eddie Henderson, Wisecracks, but
Bagels and Bongos.
But we got a jam, man, and I got to tell you, it was an honor to talk to you, and you are a kindred spirit, and you're somebody that I admire greatly, and look forward to collaborating with in the near future. So have a good weekend, and we will talk soon, my friend.
Oh, it's been a better weekend talking to you and hearing Martin Fierro and Pharaoh.
Yeah, but there's
all the wonderful things that we've just shared. I mean, it's brighter moments, and don't forget that as Smokey the Bear used to say, only you can prevent forest fires. Much love, Barkan. I'll talk to you soon. Okay. Adios. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you from studios of Arizona Public Media. Thanks to Jim Blackwood for a wonderful engineering job today, and we'll see you all next week.